Hey, everybody. A couple of days late on my weekend reflection. I think with the traveling and holidays and all that, it's probably they won't officially all end up on the weekend, but we'll still call them weekend reflections. Anyway, but as Christmas is approaching this upcoming Sunday, one thing I've been reflecting on is the context and the historical background of what we know about when Jesus was born and the first Christmas. And particularly, I've been thinking about the time period that Luke talks about in his gospel. He makes a point of identifying some key historical markers there. And he says, in the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist, he highlights that this occurred during the reign of King Herod in Judea. And then also, as we come into the narrative in chapter 2 of the birth of Jesus, it starts out with at the time the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. So he gives us this historical background to the story within the broader world in which they lived. And I don't think these things are necessarily incidental. And, part of it could be just Luke being a detailed person and wanting to make sure he tied it into what was going on in society at that time. But I also think that when you look at the whole of Luke's gospel and his telling of the story of Jesus, there's an emphasis on the marginalized that become a part of the kingdom of Jesus and the kingdom of God. And I think there's a contrast there that he's creating of the, between the corrupt and destructive powers of the day and the kingdom of the marginalized that Jesus was bringing about that would eventually be the kingdom of God, or what he would become the kingdom of God. And I think this is important to remember even today when we think about how we live in a day when it seems like so many people are chasing after power. So many people, even in institutional churches, are focused on power and how to hold on to power, it seems. And we need to kind of think of that in light of, again, the origin of the Jesus story and the beginning of the Jesus story. Because I think about this back then and even today, that those who benefited from the status quo at the time had the hardest time dealing with Jesus, whether it was the political rulers of the Roman Empire, or if it was Herod, or if it was the institutional religious leaders in the priests and the Pharisees. They constantly struggled with, how do we deal with Jesus? There were a few that started to kind of look at it and go, you know what? We need to humble ourselves and become a part of this kingdom. But many were more focused on holding on to power than they were to following this person, Jesus, that we celebrate his birth with Christmas. And I think it's the same today, that we see people who ignore things like justice, or de-emphasize things like justice, and kind of want to preserve the status quo, that there is something where that desire for power can overrule and take over our heart's desire to follow Jesus and to be a part of his kingdom. And so Christmas is coming, and it's a good time to, kind of reflect and humbly reflect on the way that Jesus entered the world, that God entered our world through Jesus. And we also need to think about how we can emulate that, how we can live that life of humility. And, one of the songs that I really like, one of my favorite Christmas songs, or decades now, is Cry of a Tiny Babe by Bruce Coburn. It's not your traditional Christmas carol by any stretch. It's very down to earth, very, very kind of gritty at times, but it really gets down to a down-to-earth presentation of the story of the birth of Christ. And I like the part in the third verse where it says, "The humblest of people catch a glimpse of their worth. For it wasn't to the palace that the Christ child comes, but the shepherds and street people, hookers and bums. I think we need to remember that we follow a God who cared about the marginalized and identified with the marginalized. And as we come into Christmas, we need to maybe think about and reflect on which type of kingdom we are seeking in this time and age. And are we seeking out following the one who identifies with the marginalized and doesn't identify with the powerful? Now, in the description, you'll see a link to a video based on the song Cry of a Tiny Babe. Definitely something I would recommend watching, listening to. Like I say, it's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, song related to Christmas. And then also, you also will see a link if you find the stuff that I'm doing here and some of these devotionals and reflections to be a blessing and an encouragement. There is a link there for supporting the work that Tina and I do through Communitas International. Well, everybody, have a Merry Christmas. Probably will do another of these somewhere between Christmas and New Year's, but we will see you again. Blessings.